Hi friends, welcome to Practice Notes and welcome to our very first Secrets of Practice interview with our wonderful guest, Ariel Horowitz. Ariel Horowitz recently graduated from the Yale School of Music where she studied with Ani Kabathian, and she's also studied with Itzhak Perlman and Catherine Cho at the Juilliard School. Ariel has been a prize winner at many international competitions and is also the founder and artistic director of Heartbeat Music Project. Ariel, I'm so glad to have you as our first guest. And so excited to learn from you and your practice tips. How are you?
I'm great. Thanks so much for having me. I feel so honored that I get to be the first professional musician on Project Practice Notes. This is very exciting.
So for our first question, I just wanted to get sort of an overview on how you approach practicing, because I know for everybody it's a little bit different, but it's also important to stay inspired and motivated. So do you have like a general mindset, a different general way to approach your practicing every day?
That's such a great question. I will say that when I was in school, and when I say school, I mean like high school, undergrad, grad, like that, the whole kind of era of like I was really, really serious practicing a lot. You know what I mean? Like,
Right.
that kind of era. I was definitely much more regimented with my practicing. And it was interesting because I had like a whole scale warm up that I did. I used the Galamian scale book and the Flesch scale book, the classic violin stuff. Oh yeah, I was like Kreutzer's biggest fangirl forever. Did all 42 studies 20 billion times. Gavinier, Rode. Someone will tell me. Someone please tell me if it's Rode or Rode. I've heard both. Don't. I mean, all of these like really incredible studies, and also I had incredible teachers who were really devoted to just like helping get their students super technically well set up. And I think that was a huge focus, especially in middle and high school for me, but even into college and even into grad school. And it's so interesting because as I've gone on, I I've started to, I guess, think less about the structure of my practicing. It doesn't mean that I, just kind of go into the practice room and it's like a free for all. But at this point for me, and again, it was interesting. We were talking just as we were meeting, like practicing is so personal. And I also think that, practicing should suit the stage of your life that you're in. And I don't necessarily just mean age, but like, what else do you have going on in your life? If you're super busy, you're probably not going to be able to just luxuriously spend 5 hours in a practice room, right? Or, if life is super chill and you want to feeling motivated and you want to spend that much time and you can spend that much time, then it's great. But I think now for me, practicing has become much more, and especially given the lack of, upcoming deadlines for me at this point, it's much more about checking in with myself and like, learning not just repertoire or new techniques or developing myself as a musician, which of course is a lifelong process. I mean, just because you are not in school, doesn't mean you're not a student anymore. It's something that I'm learning in my first foray out of school this year. But yeah, it's really a chance for me to just kind of see where I'm at in my relationship with the violin and in my relationship with music. Sometimes actually I have recently been into just kind of like doing a little bit of like improvising to warm up rather than like a structured scale. Like I'll just be like, okay, like what melodies feel fun that are obviously slow and manageable,
Yeah, that's so cool.
at the start of a practice session. But I think it's so interesting because I think the best way to learn how you like to practice is just by practicing the way that you feel like practicing any given day, if that makes sense. And it's interesting. It's an interesting exploration.
Yeah, no, that's so cool to hear you say. There were two things for me, like that you said, checking in with yourself and sort of getting to know yourself more and where you are in your relationship with the violin and just doing what you feel like, you maybe can be doing in the moment or should be doing in the moment because like for me, I really I like structure a lot, but at the same time, I also push against it when I'm
Right.
like it's really cool to hear you say like just check in with yourself and like learn more from yourself and practicing. Yeah, that's so cool.
Oh, I mean, it's interesting because, like I think, and I was thinking about this yesterday. I have a few young students, and I think, you know, when we're very young, obviously practicing is, you know, sometimes supervised by either a parent or, you know, a practice coach or a teacher, or and it's usually very regimented and with very specific goals. And I think that serves such a wonderful purpose because it teaches us, not only as, you know, potentially aspiring musicians, how to organize ourselves and how to, you know, be our own teachers. That's something that one of my first and most significant teachers in terms of my violinist developments, Mauricio Fuchs, would always say, is that you are your own best teacher, and you always have to be your own best teacher, no matter if you're 5 or 25 or 75, right?
Right.
So, you know, it's interesting because I was talking to my little student yesterday, just about, you know, because he loves to just like mess around with the violin, and like he, you know, sometimes doesn't always want to like strictly learn his pieces, but he just kind of like wants to make sounds. And
Yeah.
you know, I was like, you know, why not? Right? Like we have so many goals for ourselves all the time. Like why not spend a little space when you practice to just like do what feels nice and sounds nice and what you're interested in, right? I mean,
Yeah.
I don't know. I've been thinking about that a lot more lately, and it's so, it's one of the reasons I love teaching little ones, is because they're so good at that. They don't have any of the same like constructs that we build up and learn over time. It's like, oh, that's not proper, like, you know. So it's a
Yeah.
good practice.
Yeah, that's wonderful. That's totally wonderful. It's like so much more raw and just like there when you're little.
Absolutely. I
Yeah.
truly, we're the best musicians that we'll ever be when we're children. I mean, regardless of technique. And I think we all spend our whole lives trying to return to that intuition.
Yeah. Yeah. That's wonderful. Do you, I mean, I know we talked about keeping your practice routine like flexible and such, but do you always make goals for yourself? How
Mm.
do you keep motivated in like, yeah, manageable sort of terms, I guess?
But you know, it's so interesting because I think when I think about structure and routine in my practicing, those things are so central to how I approach each like phase of practicing. Like I think um at least for me, I have a few different like types of practicing that I try to do. I think there's like I'm not always good at keeping a good balance between them. I mean, I please don't miss it. I'm not trying to say that like, oh yeah, like I do all of these all the time and it's amazing and wonderful. I mean, you know, exactly like we've been saying, like life happens and sometimes you have to prioritize one over the other. And especially when you have deadlines coming up, prioritizing is such an important aspect of that. But I think, you know, in a balanced week of practicing, I would ideally try to spend some time just on personal, technical, you know, physical maintenance. So that would include scales, you know,
Mhm.
doing some work to just really feel like I'm physically grounded with the instrument. I really believe that the least amount of physical effort that one can use when playing an instrument, particularly a stringed instrument, I can't really speak for much else, is always going to lead to not just like the healthiest sound, but the healthiest relationship with music. So I always try to think about my setup, see if I'm holding tension anywhere. I tend to personally hold a lot of tension in my left shoulder.
Mhm.
It's a common violin viola thing. We all do this all the time. I don't know why. Someone tell me, but yeah, I like I'll be in the middle of playing and my shoulders like here. And I'm like, please, like
That's
take your seat. Yeah, like what is this? Like, you know better. Yeah, so that kind of practicing I think is really critical. And I think when I neglect that type of practicing of just really slow technical work to just like essentially maintain my physical relationship with the instrument, I think that I suffer and my playing suffers. I feel like that's like the foundational, you know, aspect of like my relationship with the violin. I think the next type of practicing is like, you know, building on skills. So for example, that's something that's a huge goal for 2021 for me, is to just feel more confident in my left hand playing fingered octaves. It's such a niche goal, but so essentially I would call that like working on limitations technically and also musically. I think that's a really great space to challenge ideas and limitations that we have around phrasing or around interpretation, or I think a lot of like listening work can come into this, like listening to music, listening to pieces that maybe one doesn't love but challenge oneself. I think that that's not just necessarily like a technical practice in terms of technical limitations, but it also can be in terms of like how we hear and how we interpret music and how we engage with music. So that's I would say like the second type of practice. And the third type of practice is like the actual learning of pieces and getting them together to sound really good or as good as one can. And I feel like that's, as we get older, the type of practicing we do the most, right? Like we're all, especially like if you have auditions coming up or a competition or a recital or a concert or anything, we're always just like, okay, like I have 2 weeks, I got to get this thing learned. It has to sound okay. Like it doesn't have to be the, magnum opus of my life, but it has to like be decent. And that type of practicing is so critical because I think that's where our limits of endurance are tested so much of the time. And I think that's actually where we become aware that the other two types of practicing are so critical. You know what I mean? Like in those moments of like, oh gosh, I have to put this whole concerto together into like a month and a half. And I did, I have to like do it. That's when we're like, oh man.
Yeah, right.
Fingered octaves. Like I keep coming back to fingered octaves. I gotta work on my fingered octaves. But yeah, so it's interesting. So I would say in a balanced week, it would contain a mix of the three for me. And I wouldn't say that necessarily I try to make all three happen every day. I used to be like, okay, I have to do my technical work, then I have to like work on skills that I really like want to develop, and then I have to like read through a whole movement of a super hard atonal concerto in a day. Now I think, I try to think of weeks of practicing rather than days of practicing. I think also that's a quarantine mindset, but like there are things that I want to accomplish in the span of a week that maybe like, of course, breaking it down into the building blocks of the 7 days of the week is always super helpful in terms of scheduling. But I think it's so much pressure, at least I found personally, to be like, okay, this has to be accomplished by the end of the day.
Right.
Like being like, okay, this is the project for this week. That feels, at least for me, a little bit more manageable. And it also forces me to think a little bit better in advance, which I'm really bad at. I am queen of the last minute planning.
Oh yeah.
She is the queen of procrastination. So doing that has helped me in that capacity a little bit better too. But I don't think we learn that fast as humans. Like I think we need to give ourselves a lot of time. We're just little people floating on a rock through space. Like we need lots of care and planning.
Yes. Yeah, I find for my weekly lessons, even like it's so interesting that you said that, because my weekly lessons, like if I have a lesson on Sunday and then Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, I'm like, oh whatever, like it just had a lesson.
Oh yeah.
Like I'll get to my stuff I really need to get into, and then like Thursday, Friday, Saturday, I'm like cramming because I just totally, I mean, it's much better to think of it as the whole week. Oh, I have to do this, instead of like just day by day, pushing it off or whatever. Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah, that's all wonderful. Okay, so I think our next question is, do you have like a certain amount of time that you practice? And especially because I know you teach, younger students as part of your Heartbeat project, does that change for you in terms of like your time goal each day? Or how what does that look like?
That's really interesting. It's so funny. I used to have a super like clear answer for that question, which maybe just reflects like how I have changed as an individual in the last number of years. But in college and into grad school, I would say that I tried to practice 4 to 5 hours a day. And I was very bad at taking time off. And that includes from like, not just practicing, but like from working in general. And I was very regimented about it and very intense about it. And I was like, oh, I have to like, if I practiced like, I would sometimes like set a timer. And if I like practiced just a little too under, I'd be like, I have to go back to the practice room to get those last 2 minutes in.
Right.
And, you know, it's so interesting because I remember being like in middle school and high school, even like late elementary school, and like how much you practiced was like such a statusy thing.
Hmm.
Like, oh, like I practice 2 hours a day after school. How much do you practice? And like, I think so much weight gets associated with how long we practice. Having said that, I think in early stages of development, if a musician is really serious about developing their technique and developing their ears and, you know, all of the things that need to go into practicing, like those hours that I spent, hours and hours and hours, you know, in middle and high school, are like the foundational building blocks for me being able to have such a relaxed relationship with practicing now.
Hmm.
You know, I think if I had not invested, I was a practicer in high school. Like I was like super, like I came home from school and I would just practice for hours on end. And like those hours that I invested at that stage, and I'm, you know, very fortunate that I was able to. I had very, you know, kind teachers. I had a really supportive family. I had the space and time and living situation to be able to do that. I understand not everyone is, you know, as privileged as I am. But if one is able to do that and one has the right guidance and support to be able to do that, I think those like middle and high school years are so critical to do the kind of like, you know, just boring practicing and like, you know, I don't know if you've ever heard of like the 10,000 hours like philosophy. I don't know how much I necessarily
Right.
believe in it. Like, if you only have like what 9,999 hours, you're not an expert. It's that like one last hour that'll do it for you. But hey, it's a great concept. But like to put those hours in early, if you can, means that in your mid 20s, which is the stage of life that I'm in, you can afford to have a little bit more of a relaxed relationship with yourself and the instrument. So I would say for young ones who are really looking to, you know, pursue music at the professional level someday, whatever that looks like, I think investing those really structured and regimented hours early on is so wonderful. And of course, that doesn't mean you can't have fun with it, right? I mean,
Hmm.
you know, everyone needs breaks, everyone needs fun, everyone needs that time too. But I think to do that then was one of the best things that I did for myself. It was like those years are such a gift. In college, of course, is when we, and I'm sure you know this, you know, now being close.
Yeah.
You know, those are the years where we really get tested and we start to get that first taste of like real life stress.
Hmm.
Like I remember being stressed in high school about my schedule. Um, but I don't think you realize how much of a safety net, and I know that high schoolers hate being told this, but I'm going to say it anyway because I'm old now and I'm, you know, going to act like an old person. But you don't realize how much of a safety net you have in high school that keeps you from truly falling on your face until you get to college, right? And then you don't have anyone telling you when to practice, and you don't have anyone telling you when to wake up, and you don't have anyone telling you when to go to bed or when to eat your meals or when to put your phone down and go for a walk around the block, and you know, all of those things that our parents nag us to do that we hate so much when we're kids. All of a sudden that security is taken away, and for
Yes.
many of us it's also financial security, and it all of a sudden just like, so we have to learn how to practice for the real world, as it
Yeah.
were, you know,
That's
like,
a great way to think about it.
right? I mean, we have to, you know, gig and teach and figure out what we're doing with our futures and, you know, come to terms with who we are as human beings, which is a lifelong process that just never ends and is
Yes.
existential and horrifying. So, you know, during during that era, my practicing was still fairly consistent, but definitely less consistent. And I was very angsty about that, which is, I think, why I like overcompensated by so much rigid structure.
Hmm.
Um, because I was, you know, like, oh, I'm a human being. What does that mean? I hate it, so I'm just going to play more violin. So, and then in grad school, I kind of just mellowed out a bit, and I was like, you know, life's short. I'm going to practice what I need to practice and do the work that needs to be done, and then I'm going to enjoy my life. And that's kind of the stage where I'm at now. But again, I wouldn't have been able to get to this stage where I feel relaxed about my practicing and feel like I won't be mad at myself if I don't practice for a little bit, if I hadn't invested that time up front. You know, it's just interesting because it's like when you're a professional musician, it's like your relationship to your instrument is the longest relationship you'll ever be in, other than your relationship to your family and yourself, which is kind of terrifying. Unless you switch careers, which is always great. I love when people switch careers. I'm like, good for you. Like, you're living the dream.
Yeah, right.
But you know, it's so interesting because like that relationship needs breaks and it needs tending to, and just the way that any other relationship does. So yeah, it's interesting to see how it transforms for everybody.